A deputy in the Henn Water Conservancy department read an engineer's design, decided it was too conservative, and cut the number of outlet gates from 12 to 5. He is not a famous man. I cannot give you his name, because the record that came out in 2005 does not give it to me. The engineer he overruled was Chen Xing, chief engineer of that same department. Chen was labeled a right-wing opportunist and removed from his job. 22 years later, at 1 in the morning on the 8th of August, 1975, the Banqiao Dam went over the top and disintegrated. 61 more dams failed behind it that same day. The documents stayed classified for 30 years. I'm Ray Callahan. This is the deadliest structural failure in recorded history, and the part almost nobody covers is the part that decided it, a personnel decision made in the 1950s by a man whose name we do not have. Chen Xing was born in Nanjing in July of 1921. He spent the 50s arguing that the dams his own government was racing to build could not pass the water that would eventually arrive. He lost that argument, got removed, was brought back in 1961 when the problems started showing up, kept saying the same thing, and was removed again. This episode is about the gap between what he asked for and what got built. It is also about a second thing, quieter and in some ways worse. By August of 1975, those 5 gates could not deliver even the capacity they had been designed for, and nothing in the operating record accounted for that. One warning about sourcing before we start. These documents were a state secret until 2005. A significant part of what the world knows came out through a human rights investigation rather than an engineering inquiry, and that shapes what can be said with confidence. Every figure I attach to a number in this episode comes from the American Dam Safety Case record or from peer-reviewed meteorology. There is one number where the record contradicts itself, and when we reach it, I will stop and show you both versions. Start with the dam, because the design is ordinary. That is what makes it worth studying. Banqiao was built on the Ru River in Henn province between April of 1951 and June of 1952. 14 months, start to finish. It was an earthfill embankment, a core of compacted clay with a shell of sand packed around it, standing about 80 feet high. Between 1955 and 56, it was rehabilitated under Soviet specification, reinforced, and raised by nearly 10 feet. The reservoir held 399,000 acre-feet at normal capacity, with another 304,000 acre-feet of space reserved for floods. That second number is the one worth watching. Flood storage is the entire safety concept of a dam like this. You keep a volume of the reservoir deliberately empty, so that when a storm arrives, the water has somewhere to go while you work the gates. The size of that empty space, divided by how fast you can drain it, is the number of hours you own. And it was designed against a specific storm. A 1 in a 1,000-year rainfall of 20.9 inches over 3 days. Around 306 millimeters in a single day. Slow down on that phrase, because it does not mean what most people hear when they hear it. A 1 in a 1,000-year storm is a probability statement extracted from a rainfall record. In 1951, the rainfall record for that part of Henn ran a few decades. You are estimating the worst storm in a millennium from perhaps 30 years of measurements, and then building a structure whose failure kills tens of thousands of people on the strength of that estimate. The number that comes out of that calculation is an extrapolation with enormous error bars, presented to everyone downstream as a specification. Chen Xing's objection was, in engineering terms, an objection to exactly that. He did not trust the length of the record, and he did not think the outlet capacity being built into these dams left any margin for the record being wrong. That is what too conservative meant in the memo that overruled him. Now, the context, because a single deputy did not invent this pressure. China in the 1950s was building water infrastructure at a pace that has few parallels anywhere. Dams went up by the thousands, on schedules set politically rather than hydrologically, with the Soviet Union supplying technical doctrine. In that environment, an engineer asking for more outlet capacity is asking for more concrete, more steel, more months, and more money on a project whose completion date is already a commitment somebody made upward. In that room, conservative was a political word wearing technical clothes. Chen Xing's file shows the label that followed it, right-wing opportunist. That phrase was not a performance review. In the China of that decade, it was a category with consequences. Here is the physics that makes an earth dam different from the dam most people picture, and it decides everything about how Banqiao ended. A concrete gravity dam is a solid object. Run water over the top of one and you get scouring and damage, but concrete does not dissolve. A properly founded concrete dam can be overtopped and survive it. It has happened. An earthfill embankment cannot. It is compacted soil held together by its own weight and by friction between particles. The clay core is the water barrier. The sand shell is the structure. Both are made of pieces that moving water can pick up and carry away. Water flowing over the crest of an earth dam removes material. Removing material deepens the notch. A deeper notch concentrates more flow through that one place, which removes material faster, which deepens the notch further. That is a runaway with no equilibrium in it. There is no width at which the process balances and stops. Once an earth dam is overtopping, the outcome is settled, and the only remaining variable is how many minutes it takes. At Banqiao, the overtopping that started the disintegration was about 1 foot. 1 foot. On a structure 80 feet tall, holding back a reservoir 7 miles wide when it spread, the margin between intact and gone was 12 inches of water going over a crest. So the entire event reduces to one question. Could the dam get rid of water faster than the sky delivered it? That capacity has a number. 5 sluice gates, rated at 62,000 cubic feet per second. And then something happened to those gates that appears on no drawing. They silted up, and silt is a slow, undramatic material. It does not arrive in an event. It accumulates at a few millimeters a year, invisibly, at the bottom of a reservoir nobody drains and inspects, in a country that in those decades had other priorities. Every river carries sediment, and sediment drops out of suspension where the water slows down, which, in a reservoir, means against the upstream face of the dam. Over 23 years, silt accumulated against the face of Banqiao and against the intakes of the gates themselves. By 1975, those 5 gates could not discharge at their rated capacity. Hold on to what that means, because it is the quiet center of this whole story. The margin Chen Xing said was too thin in 1952 did not stay too thin. It kept shrinking every year through ordinary river sediment doing exactly what river sediment does. And none of that decline appeared anywhere in the number the dam was still being operated against. The specification on the page said 62,000 cubic feet per second. The dam in the valley could not do it and had not been able to do it for years. Nobody hid that. It is more unsettling than hiding. There was simply no mechanism that connected the slow physical reality in the water to the number the operators were working from. This is a failure mode that still exists everywhere, in every kind of infrastructure. A structure is commissioned with a specification. The specification is written down, and it is correct on the day it is written. Then the structure spends decades in the physical world, where things settle and silt and corrode and fatigue. And the piece of paper does not change, because nobody's job is to change it. The gap opens quietly, and it opens in the direction of danger every single time. There is one more failure built into the site, and it is almost too tidy to be real. The offices of the Banqiao Reservoir Management Bureau were located along the rim of the reservoir. When the reservoir rose, it flooded the Bureau's own offices, knocked out telephone service, and cut contact with the weather stations tracking the storm. The people responsible for deciding when to warn everyone downstream lost the ability to see the storm and the ability to make a phone call in the same event, for the same reason. Typhoon Nina came ashore in China on the 5th of August, 1975, and moved inland. That is the ordinary life of a typhoon. Landfall, then weakening as it loses the ocean. This one ran into a cold front over Henn and stopped moving. A stalled tropical system does not distribute its rain across a province as it travels. It stands over one watershed and empties into it. Near the center, more than 1,060 millimeters of rain fell in a single day. Over 41 inches, more than the region's normal rainfall for an entire year, delivered in 24 hours. In Quechin County, 1,100 millimeters fell across 3 days. Now set that against the specification. The dam was built to pass 20.9 inches over 3 days. It received more than 41 inches in one. The first day alone exceeded the highest rainfall ever recorded in that region by nearly 40%. I want to be exact about the claim I am making, because it would be easy to overreach here, and the overreach would be dishonest. No dam built to any standard of that era passes that storm. 12 gates instead of 5 does not save Banqiao from 41 inches in a day. That is not the argument, and anyone who tells you it is has not run the numbers. What extra outlet capacity buys is time. Time to draw the reservoir down before the peak arrives. Time for the crest to pass beneath the crest of the dam instead of over it. Time for a warning to reach a town 20 miles downstream while there is still road to leave on. Outlet capacity is a schedule, not a shield. It decides how many hours you get, and hours are what the people downstream needed. That is the thing Chen Xing was arguing about in 1952 in a memo about gate counts 23 years before the water came. Somebody wrote this down before it happened. And here is the caveat I promised you, because it lands right on this number. The 12-5 decision is documented in Chen Xing's biographical record and attributed there to Banqiao. The American Dam Safety Case Study attributes the same episode. 12 outlet gates cut to 5 is too conservative, to a different reservoir he worked on, Suya Lake. And the most cautious encyclopedic account of the failure declines to make the claim at all, saying only that Chen opposed the program and warned about flood risk. So treat the number 12 as contested, and I would rather you hear that from me than find it yourself afterward. What is not contested? Banqiao was built with 5 gates. Chen Xing said the outlet capacity across these dams was insufficient, and he said it in writing to the department that employed him more than 20 years before the water came. He was removed for it, brought back in '61, removed again. The reservoir was near maximum capacity by the end of the first day of the storm. On the 7th of August, at 4 in the afternoon, a fresh rainstorm began. It ran for 13 hours. At 7 that evening, evacuation notices went out to some of the towns downstream. Some. At 9:30, the first dam failure warning went out by telegraph because the telephones were already gone. A telegram is a fine instrument for a message that can wait. The people it was addressed to had about 3.5 hours. At 1 o'clock in the morning on the 8th of August, the water crested at 117.94 meters. It went over the top of the dam by about a foot, and the embankment began to come apart. The reservoir emptied in roughly 6 hours. 23 years of accumulation gone between 1 in the morning and breakfast. Peak discharge is estimated at 2.8 million cubic feet per second, close to 500,000 acre-feet left through the breach, moving at over 30 miles an hour, 44 feet per second, in a wave running more than 30 feet deep. The flood spread more than 7 miles wide and covered 3 million acres. For scale, that is an area larger than the state of Connecticut, underwater that arrived in the dark in August, with a telegram as the warning system. Then comes the arithmetic that makes Banqiao different from every other dam failure on record. The water did not stop at the first town. It arrived at the next dam downstream. And that dam was also an earthfill embankment, also designed against a return period, also already at capacity from the same storm that had just overwhelmed Banqiao. It failed too, and its reservoir joined the wave. Then the same thing happened again at the next one, and the one after that. This is the part that separates Banqiao from a large flood. A cascade is not a bigger version of one dam failing. It is a different category of event because each failure hands the next one a load it was never designed against, and the wave gets larger at every step instead of dissipating the way floodwater normally does across a floodplain. 61 more dams failed that day, not damaged. Gone in a cascade, each one adding its water to the thing that destroyed the next. That is why the outlet capacity argument was never really about one dam. Chen Xing had been objecting to a system of dams built to the same standard, in the same basin, on the same assumption about the same rainfall record. Get the extrapolation wrong once, and you have a bad dam. Get it wrong across a province, and you have built a chain. In the village of Qianhu, the recorded death rate was 63.5%. Not the damage rate, the death rate. Nearly 2 out of every 3 people who lived there. The Chinese government put the toll at 26,000. In August of 1975, the Henn Provincial Communist Party Committee's own preliminary estimate was 85,600. A study published in 1989 put instant deaths from the flood wave at 85,000, and that study was withdrawn. Human Rights Watch, in 1995, estimated around 230,000 in total, counting the epidemics, the famine, and the infections that followed the water. Other reconstructions reach 240,000, of which roughly 140,000 are attributed to what came after the flood rather than to the flood itself. I am not going to choose one of those numbers for you. The distance between 26,000 and 230,000 is the distance between a disaster and a suppressed one, and the honest thing is to hand you all four figures with a name attached to each. The documents were a state secret until 2005. For 30 years, the deadliest structural failure in recorded history was a thing you could not look up. Chen Xing lived to see them released. He died in May of 2009 at 87. He had spent the 1980s on the board of an international agricultural energy organization, the first Chinese member to sit on it, which is its own quiet comment on how the 50s had used him. Banqiao itself was rebuilt in 1993. The new dam has a spillway rated at about 530,000 cubic feet per second and 8 large radial gates, against the 5 it had in 1975, and against the 12 engineer said it needed. And the standard changed, everywhere, including here in the United States. High-hazard dams are no longer designed against a return period. They are designed against the probable maximum flood, the worst flood that could physically be produced by the most severe combination of meteorological and hydrological conditions that basin can generate. Not the worst on record, the worst that is possible. Every high-hazard dam in America is now held to a standard that exists because 62 dams failed in one Chinese province on one night in 1975, and it took 30 years for the rest of the world to be allowed to read why. That is a different question with a different method behind it. You stop asking the rainfall record what it has seen because you now understand the record is too short to be asked. You ask the atmosphere what it is physically capable of delivering into that particular basin. How much moisture the air can hold, how much of it a stalled system could wring out over that catchment. And you build for that instead. That change is the real monument to Banqiao, and it is an admission. It concedes that a rainfall record is too short to extrapolate from, that the tail of the distribution is where dams die, and that a margin which looks generous on a drawing goes on quietly shrinking in the water for 23 years while the number on the page stays the same. Chen Xing argued for a bigger margin, and a deputy wrote that it was too conservative. That word was doing a great deal of work. In 1952, conservative meant timid, unambitious, insufficiently revolutionary. It turned out to mean correct.